Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Busboys and Poets Books Presents, our in-house series here where we invite authors of all kinds, from poetry to fiction to nonfiction, to come and share their art and work with us. Here tonight, we have a very special program for you all, and I'm so excited to introduce them. But first, my name is Lori. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the Director of Operations for Busboys and Poets Books. Busboys and Poets, as well as Busboys and Poets Books, are a just series of restaurants and bookstores that main mission is to promote social justice and really highlight the voices that we need for tomorrow's future. So without further ado, we're actually going to take it back a step in time. First published in 1999, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, an anthology of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, is back in a new reprint as of 2021. Very exciting. And you're probably wondering, is there really that much that we need to revisit? And unfortunately, there is. So between 1999 and 2021, we have seen monumental strides in civil rights and also, unfortunately, monumental mishaps and stepbacks. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and welcome Susie on screen. Susie.
Hi, hello, everyone. Before I welcome you to tonight's program, we're going to kick off the evening with the award-winning husband and wife duo, Terry Leonino and Greg Artzner, who I've known since 1976. They're part of the 2-CD set that actually goes along with the book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Songs of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. And here they are. Please welcome Magpie.
1, 2, 3. Pardon me, all you people who enjoy your peace of mind. You say everybody's equal, everybody is doing fine. You should have been down in Mississippi in the summer of '64. If you were down in Mississippi, you wouldn't say that anymore. Pardon me, Mr. Backlash, you say you're worried about your home. Say we're going too far too fast. Say you wanna be left alone. You should have been down in Mississippi in the summer of '64. If you were down in Mississippi, you wouldn't say that anymore. Pardon me, Mr. Policeman, while you're shining up your shield. Say you stand for law and order, you wouldn't do no dirty deal. You should have been down in Mississippi in the summer of '64. If you were down in Mississippi, you wouldn't say that anymore. Pardon me, Mr. Soldier, while you're marching down the road. Say you're fighting for your future, for the freedoms that you hold. You should have been down in Mississippi in the summer of '64. If you were down in Mississippi, you wouldn't say that anymore. Pardon me, Mr. President, you want your place in history. You say you're doing all you can do to make all the people free. You should have been down in Mississippi in the summer of '64. If you were down in Mississippi, you wouldn't say that anymore. Pardon me, all you people who enjoy your peace of mind. Say you're doing all you can do to make all the people fine. You should have been down in Mississippi in the summer of '64. If you were down in Mississippi, you wouldn't say that anymore. That was a song written by Phil Oakes.
Welcome, everyone, to our celebration of the reprint of Freedom is a Constant Struggle, an anthology of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Andy Shalal. For decades, Andy has supported my special projects, providing space and often sustenance to my guests and artists. I also want to thank the Busboys and Poets staff for helping to make this evening possible. I'm so grateful to Randall Williams and Suzanne LaRosa, the co-founders of New South Books, for believing in this collection and feeling the urgency to get these stories out there more than 20 years after the book was initially published. Approximately 40 of the contributors have passed on. That's almost half of the brave movers and shakers who entrusted me with their most precious memories. These courageous foot soldiers who went head to head with the Mississippi Closed Society to make the Magnolia State more equal and inclusive. Their spirits certainly live on in the re-release of this comprehensive 560-page anthology. Some SNCC survivors are in the house tonight. A special welcome to them. I want to thank Magpie and Jerry Mitchell for participating in this event. We are the next generation, the allies who are responsible for keeping these stories alive. Lastly, my partner of 37 years, Brad McKelvey. He is my wingman. Now, I'll get down to business. In the first part of the program, I'm going to present some abbreviated readings from the anthology. In between the readings, songs will be sung by Magpie. In the second part of the program, Jerry Mitchell will discuss his involvement with the civil rights movement cold cases. Then we will open up the forum for questions and comments. Let's get started. One of the most courageous women who I spoke with was Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley. Her 14-year-old son from Chicago, Emmett Lewis Till, was visiting relatives in Money, Mississippi. In the twilight hours of August 28, 1955, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam dragged him out of bed, made him lie face down in the back of a pickup truck, took him to a tool house, pistol whipped him, drove him to a gin near Boyle, where he was forced to lift a heavy fan onto the truck. Then they drove to the Tallahatchie River, made him carry the fan to the riverbank and strip. Milam shot him in the head. Bryant helped tie the fan around his neck, and they dumped him in the river. A modern-day lynching for supposedly whistling at a white woman. Here's the letter Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley wrote to me for submission to the book. Dear Miss Ehrenrich, as I reflect upon the terror which reigned in the twilight hours of August 28, 1955, when my son, Emmett Lewis Till, was forcibly taken from the home of my aunt and uncle, Elizabeth and Moses Wright, I realize that the purpose for which Emmett died has not as yet been fulfilled. Yet, nations of people realized that they had become tired. I understand now that my decision to hold a 5-day wake, during which time 600,000 people were allowed to view my son's mutilated body, was not due to my genius, but was the guidance of a higher power. So powerful was the impact upon the viewers that protest meetings were held throughout the nation. Nearly every country in the world sent reporters to bring back the news. The civil rights movement had begun. Rosa Parks realized that she was tired of racial injustice, so she sat down. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so tired that he stood up, ending segregation on Alabama buses and interstate travel. Uppermost in my mind is the trial, which lasted 5 hot days. The 118-degree temperature in the courtroom was mild compared to the hate which filled every inch. Not only was food and drink served to the accused, Royal Bryant and J.W. Milam, they were also allowed to play with their boys and use the judge's washroom. The Black witnesses were unable to purchase and had to walk 2 blocks to the nearest cafe to relieve themselves. The courage of the Black witnesses was unprecedented. Although some trembled with fear, they stood tall and told what they had seen. Moses Wright identified the kidnappers. Willie Reed dared to view the entire grisly beating and shooting through a crack in the boards of the barn. Amanda Bradley identified the truck which carried Emmett into the barn. She also told how J.W. Milam washed the blood from his person and later from the bed of the truck. I was accused of collaborating with the NAACP to dig up a body, put a 200-pound weight around its neck, and planting it in the Tallahatchie River. Although I had positively identified Emmett's body, the defense contended that Emmett was alive in Detroit, Michigan. The not guilty verdict came over the radio when we were about 45 minutes from Sumner. The jury had been advised, I know that every last Anglo-Saxon one of you will set these men free. They did. The foreman said it wouldn't have taken them 1 hour and 5 minutes to bring in a verdict, but they were told to make it look good. So they drank soda water and told jokes to pass the time. 2 months later, in November, they, the defendants, were also found not guilty of the kidnapping charges to which they had admitted. Because of the reporters, the cameras, and the videotapes, we escaped with our lives. The locals thought the scenes were being instantly transmitted and were too cowardly to do us bodily harm, with the world looking on. Here's Magpie with another song.
This song was also written by Phil Oakes. Phil was one of those northern folk singers and songwriters, topical songwriters, who wrote many songs about the movement, some of which never made it onto his records, like this one called How Long?
How long, how long, oh, can we go on? How long can we go on? This troubled ride may never last. There is no future if we forget the past. How far have we gone? How far have we gone? So many struggles we lost. So many people on the cross. Why the fear of the coming of the Lord? Why the trembling at the call? Can we hear the final warning? Can we see the writing on the wall? So many years before the dawn, so many years before the dawn, so many children have never grown. So many seeds of hatred sown, so many rains had fallen, so many rains have had fallen, so many storms before the flood, so many rainbows red with blood. Why the fear of the coming of the morning? Why the trembling at the call? Can't we hear the final warning? Can we see the writing on the wall? How long can we go on? How long can we go on? This troubled land may never last. There is no future if we forget the past.
Jack Newfield, a columnist for the New York Post, whose piece was excerpted from his book, A Prophetic Minority, The American New Left, introduced me to the legacy of Herbert Lee, a 52-year-old father of 9 from a Mike County. Lee had attended voter registration classes and attempted to register at the courthouse in Liberty, Mississippi. On September 21st, 1961, E.H. Hurst, a member of the Mississippi State Legislature, whose property was adjacent to Lee's, shot him in the brain with a .38 caliber revolver. It happened about noon in front of a dozen witnesses. Lee, wearing his farmer's overalls and field boots, was sitting in the cab of his pickup truck and fell out into the gutter when he was shot. For 2 hours, his body lay in a pool of blood, uncovered and swarmed over by insects. A coroner's jury in Liberty met and ruled that Lee was killed in self-defense. We're going to hear another song performed by Magpie. This one was written by Snick Freedom singer Matthew Jones. It's called Tree of Life. Matt is no longer with us, but during his lifetime, he wrote over 500 songs. Here's Terry and Greg.
There are things that we know that we don't know we know. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we know that we don't know we know. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we know that we don't know we know. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we say that we don't know we say. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we say that we don't know we say. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we say that we don't know we say. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we feel that we don't know we feel. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we feel that we don't know we feel. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we feel that we don't know we feel. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we love that we don't know we love. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we love that we don't know we love. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we love that we don't know we love. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we know that we don't know we know. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we know that we don't know we know. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. Come to the tree of life. There are things that we know that we don't know we know. Come to the tree of life.
Merle Evers graciously talked with me and wrote about her husband, Medgar Wiley Evers. He had served his country in World War II, only to return home to find that he was still considered less than a first-class citizen. He was still addressed as boy. He could not vote, although he paid taxes. He could not use public facilities such as libraries, swimming pools, parks, and recreational centers. He could not try on clothes or shoes at department stores or eat in restaurants. He could only sit in the buzzard roost at movie theaters. Housing and jobs were substandard, and quality education was a joke. Medgar was a pioneer in the civil rights movement. As the first NAACP field secretary in Mississippi, he was on the firing line when there were no cameras, no media to cover his bravery, when so many were afraid to be seen with or near him. He was the first African American to apply for admission to the University of Mississippi Law School, the first to file a suit to integrate the public schools of Mississippi, the first to investigate and secure witnesses in the Emmett Till murder, the first to boldly challenge a Mississippi system designed to forever keep, quote unquote, darkies in their place. For this, Medgar was assassinated in front of his home in view of his wife and children in the early morning of June 12th, 1963. His accused killer, Byron D. LeBeckwith, was found guilty after a third trial on February 5th, 1994. He died in prison. Here's Magpie with another Phil Oakes tune, Too Many Martyrs.
In the state of Mississippi, many years ago, a boy of 14 years got a taste of Southern law. He saw his friend a-hanging, his color was his crime, and the blood upon his jacket left the brand upon his mind. Too many martyrs and too many dead, too many lies, too many empty words were said, too many times for too many angry men. Oh, let it never be again. Oh, let it never be again. His name was Medgar Evers, and he walked his road alone, like Emmett Till and thousands more whose names we'll never know. They tried to burn his home and they beat him to the ground, but deep inside they knew what it would take to bring him down. Too many martyrs and too many dead, too many lies, too many empty words were said, too many times for too many angry men. Oh, let it never be again. Oh, let it never be again. The killer waited by his home, hidden in the night, as Evers stepped out from his car into the rifle's sight. Beckwith squeezed the trigger, the bullet left his side. It struck the heart of everyone when Evers fell and died. Too many martyrs and too many dead, too many lies, too many empty words were said, too many times for too many angry men. Oh, let it never be again. Oh, let it never be again. They laid him in his grave while the bugles sounded clear, they laid him in his grave when the victory was near. While we wait for the future, for freedom through the land, the country gained a killer and the country lost a man. Too many martyrs and too many dead, too many lies, too many empty words were said, too many times for too many angry men. Oh, let it never be again. Oh, let it never be again.
Here's a short segment of the story Ben Chaney wrote for the Freedom is a Constant Struggle anthology. Ben is the brother of James Chaney. The title is They Came Up Missing. The quilt lay unfinished in its wooden frame. 3 weeks ago, she started this quilt. The Saturday before J.E., Mickey, and Andy disappeared, Mama trimmed a lot of old hand-me-down clothes that other folks had given her, clothes that were too small for her children, which she arranged into decorative color patches. She then stitched the color patches together in a beautiful arrangement to make the quilt's top. Next, she took the leftovers from the patches and pieced them together to make the back. Mama would then stretch the bottom on the floor where she would put an even layer of cotton over it. Then she would put the colorful top on and roll the entire thing up on a long wooden pole. She would put the pole into the wooden frame and hand stitch the entire quilt, inch by inch, as she unrolled it off the pole. It usually took Mama 4 days and plenty of scraps to make a queen-size quilt. But this quilt has been in the frame ever since J.E. came up missing 30 days ago. Mama had the quilt, separated from Daddy for several years. She had always worked long hours on white folks' jobs just to have the money needed to raise 5 children. But ever since J.E. became a civil righter, white folks stopped giving Mama work. They said she let her son slanderize Mississippi whites. So now, to feed her children, she had to fall back on the skill taught to her by her grandmother, making quilts. Before J.E. went with Mickey and Rita to Ohio, Mama said that she wanted to make as many quilts as she could by fall. That way, she'd have plenty to sell when the weather got cold. Being only 12, nobody ever paid much attention to anything I said or did. Now, since J.E. has disappeared, Mama pays attention to every word and gesture. She won't let me go out to Davis Street Park down the street to play ball. I can't play in the house because it's too clean. Mama cleans it 4 to 5 times a day. Just yesterday, after breakfast and after my sister had washed the dishes, Mama took every dish, pot, pan, and washed them again. Not once, but 3 times. My sister tried to help her, but Mama wouldn't let no one in the kitchen. This old house will never get dirty again. Here's Terry and Greg, and I'm going to let them introduce the next song to you.
This song is written by Pete Seeger. And
words by Francis Taylor.
Right, words by Francis Taylor.
And this is one of many songs that were written in the immediate aftermath of the disappearance of Goodman, Schwerner, and Chaney.
This was written in 1966.
I think of Andy in the cold, wet clay. Those three are on my mind, with his friends beside him on that final day. Those three are on my mind. But I breathe yet, and for some the sky is bright. I cannot give up hoping for a morning light. And so I ask the killers, do you sleep at night? Those three are on my mind. Those three are on my mind. There lies young James in his mortal pain. Those three are on my mind. So I ask the killers, can you sleep again? Those three are on my mind. But I breathe yet, and for some the sky is bright. I cannot give up hoping for a morning light. And so I ask the killers, do you sleep at night? Those three are on my mind. Those three are on my mind. I see blue-eyed Michael with his blue-eyed bride. Those three are on my mind. And those three proud mothers weeping side by side. Those three are on my mind. But I breathe yet, and for some the sky is bright. I cannot give up hoping for a morning light. And so I ask the killers, do you sleep at night? Those three are on my mind. Those three are on my mind. I see the tin-roofed shanties where my people live. Those three are on my mind. And the burned-out churches where they sang We Forgive. Those three are on my mind. While on the backwood roads ride the hooded bands, poisoning the air of the southern lands. So I ask the killers, can you ever wash your hands? Those three are on my mind. Those three are on my mind. There sits the mighty judges handing down the law. Those three are on my mind. In their marble courthouse we are filled with awe. Those three are on my mind. I know of Tom Paine's watered tree, I know the price of liberty. So I must ask the question that still burns in me. Did they also burn the courthouse when they killed those three? Those three are on my mind. Those three are on my mind. Those three are on my mind.
Jerry Mitchell, an award-winning reporter who's with us this evening, gave me a copy of Horace Doyle Barnett's FBI confession concerning his participation in the 1964 murders of 3 civil rights workers: James Chaney, a Congress of Racial Equality volunteer from Meridian, Mississippi; Michael Schwerner, a Corps worker from New York; and Andrew Goodman, a New York volunteer. Barnett told the FBI that Deputy Sheriff Cecil Price stopped the workers' 1963 Ford Fairline station wagon in the middle of the night after they had been released from jail on some trumped-up charge. Price forced them into his car and drove to some gravel road. They were joined by members of the Ku Klux Klan. Wayne, one of the Klan members, Barnett didn't know his last name, pulled Michael Schwerner out of the car and said, "Are you that N lover?" And Schwerner said, "Sir, I know just how you feel." At that point, Schwerner was shot. Then Wayne went back to Price's car and got Andrew Goodman and shot him. By the time Jim Jordan, another Klan member, said, "Save one for me," he pulled James Chaney out of the car and shot him. Barnett said that he did not remember how many times Jordan shot him. He does remember Jordan saying, "You didn't leave me anything but an N, but at least I killed me an N." The three civil rights workers were then put into the back of their 1963 Ford wagon and driven to a dam site in Philadelphia, Mississippi. It was about 2 a.m. Their buried bodies were found on August 4th, 1964. According to Julian Bond, one of the founding members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, otherwise known as SNCC, and a participant in this book, by summer's end, 4 project workers had been killed. 4 people had been critically wounded. 80 workers had been beaten. There had been over 1,000 arrests. 37 churches had been bombed or burned, and 30 Black businesses or homes had been burned. Here's Magpie. They're going to introduce you to the last 2 songs they'll be singing during this program.
So we're going to sing a song called "Take Off Your Thirsty Boots," which was written by Eric Anderson. And he dedicated this song to all of those who had volunteered and all those who went down to Mississippi during that summer of 1964.
You've long been on the open road. You've been sleeping in the rain. From dirty words and muddy cells, your clothes are soiled and stained. The dirty words and muddy cells will soon be judged insane. So please stop to rest yourself till you are off again. So take off your thirsty boots and stay for a while. Your feet are hot and weary from a dusty mile. And maybe I can make you laugh. Maybe I can try. I'm just looking for the evening, the morning in your eyes. But tell us of the ones you saw, as far as you can see, across the plains from field to town, marching to be free. And of the rusted prison gates that tumble by degree, like laughing children, one by one, they look like you and me. So take off your thirsty boots and stay for a while. Your feet are hot and weary from a dusty mile. And maybe I can make you laugh. Maybe I can try. I'm just looking for the evening, the morning in your eyes. I know you are no stranger down the crooked rainbow trails, from dancing cliff edge shattered sills of slandered shackled jails. The voices drift up from below as the walls are being scaled. Yes, all of this and more, my friend, your song shall not be failed. So take off your thirsty boots and stay for a while. Your feet are hard and weary from a dusty mile. And maybe I can make you laugh, maybe I can try. I'm just looking for the evening, the morning in your eyes.
So
Now, this last song is actually one that was written by Marshall Jones and Matthew's brother, and two of them actually wrote many songs. This is probably one of the hardest ones we ever had to learn to sing, and it's called "In the Mississippi River," and I think it is pretty self-explanatory. We wanted to take this moment also to thank Susie and Jerry and Busboys and all of you for coming tonight and being part of this very special reprint of this book. This is called "In the Mississippi River."
Mississippi River,
Lord, 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 Lord.
In the Mississippi River,
Lord, 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 Lord.
in the Mississippi River.
Well, you can count them one by one. It could be your son. Count them 2 by 2. It could be me or you. Count them 3 by 3. Do you want to see? Count them 4 by 4. Well, into the river they go. Into the river they go. And you can count them 5 by 5 with their hands tied. They don't come out alive and their feet tied. Count them 6 by 6.
Folks throughout their
In
body,
Mississippi they've got it fixed.
like good men
And you can count them 7 by 7.
and short
In Mississippi this sure ain't heaven.
and shady.
And you can count them 8 by 8.
Trophy.
And they were thrown in because of hate.
Yeah.
And you can count them 9 by 9. In Mississippi this ain't no crime.
Yes.
And you can count them 10 by 10.
And we wonder when the right will win. In Mississippi River.
Lord, 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 Lord.
In the Mississippi River.
Lord, 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 Lord.
In the Mississippi River.
But you can count them. In the Mississippi River, you can count them. In the Yazoo River, you can count them. In the Pearl
their hands
River,
tied.
you can count them. In the Tom
And their
Dickey
feet
River,
tied.
you can count them. In the Tallahatchie
heads
River,
cut
you
off.
can count them. In the Mississippi River,
In the Mississippi River.
Lord, 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 Lord. In the Mississippi River, Lord, 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 Lord. In the Mississippi River.
We're gonna stop them from going in the river. Gonna stop them from going in the river. Gonna stop them in the Yazoo River. Gonna stop them in the Pearl River. Gonna stop them in the Tom Stickney River. Gonna stop them in the Tallahatchie River. Gonna stop them in the Mississippi River. Gonna stop them.
Now I'd like to turn the program over to award-winning investigative reporter Jerry Mitchell. He's here to discuss his involvement with the civil rights movement cold cases.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much, Susie, for hosting this program, and I'm so glad to see your book back in print, and certainly want to thank Poets and Busboys as well, and Magpie for the great songs, and music is, as Susie will tell you, and anyone else will tell you in the movement, we're so key to the movement in terms of. I know a lot of the movement people told me how important it was in terms of, changing and keeping their spirits up. I'm transferring from my car to my house. I'm almost here. So bear with me anyway. But it was, it's been an interesting journey for me. I don't know if you're like me, but if somebody tells me that I can't have something, I want it like a million times worse. And so there was something in Mississippi called the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, which was this state segregation of spy agency that existed until from the 50s into the 1970s. And so I got interested when I found out that all these documents that the Sovereignty Commission had collected, more than 132,000. Okay, now I'm in my office. Had been collected by the spy agency, and they were all sealed. They were sealed by the Mississippi legislature for 50 years. So when I found that out, my first thought was, there's got to be something in here. They wouldn't seal them for 50 years if there wasn't something in the records they didn't want seen. And so I began to develop sources who had access to the records, and basically began to leak me the records. And what they show is at the same time the state of Mississippi was prosecuting a guy named Byron D. Beckwith for the murder of Medgar Evers. This other arm of the state, the Sovereignty Commission, was secretly assisting the defense trying to get Beckwith acquitted. And nobody knew that. So my story ran October the 1st, 1989. At the time the story ran, the odds were literally more than 1,000,000 to 1 against the case ever being reopened or re-prosecuted. But Merle Evers, the widow of Medgar Evers, believed and she prayed, and some amazing things happened. A couple of months later, Jackson police are cleaning out a closet, happened to find a box that contained a crime scene photographs of the killing of Medgar Evers, including the fingerprint of Byron D. Beckwith, lifted from the murder weapon. A few months after that, Merle Evers shared with me her copy of the court transcript that she had saved in a safety deposit box. And a few months after that, the prosecutor in the case found the murder weapon in his father-in-law's closet. So all these things that had to happen did happen. And the case was successfully reopened. I ended up going to interview Byron D. Beckwith. He lived in a place called Signal Mountain, Tennessee. It was just outside of Chattanooga. So I drove up there, met with him, spent about 6.5 hours talking to him. Absolutely the most racist person I ever spent serious time with. It was like N-word this, N-word that. Then he started in on all the other non-white races. He's also very anti-Semitic. He's a part of what's called Christian Identity, if we want to talk more about that later, which is this very racist religion, white supremacist religion. So it was, how some people, if you talk to them for a long time, you feel like maybe you need to go get a bath or something afterwards. That was kind of the way it was. So So I talked with him, like I said, for 6 hours. It was starting to get dark, and I thought, it's a good time to go. So I told him I was ready to go, and he just sort of like walked me out to my car, and I'm like, really? That's okay. I think I can find my way. So he walked me out to the car, got me out to the car, and said, if you write positive things about white Caucasian Christians, God will bless you. If you write negative things about white Caucasian Christians, God will punish you. If God does not punish you directly, several individuals will do it for him. And so his wife had made me a sandwich. I think you can guess what I did with the sandwich. So Byron D. Beckwith was indicted months after that for the murder of Medgar Evers, and he fought extradition back from Tennessee back to Mississippi. He lost that battle. At the time I interviewed him, I had no idea that I wrote the story, got the case reopened. By now he figured it out. And so he saw me across the courtroom and said, you see that boy over there? When he dies, he's going to Africa. And I turned to a friend of mine and went, boys wanted to go to Africa. So Byron D. Beckwith was convicted on February 5th, 1994, in the exact same courtroom he'd been tried in almost 30 years to the day. And when the word guilty rang out, you could hear the waves of joy as they cascaded down the hall till they reached a foyer full of people, black and white, just erupted in cheers. And I just felt chills because the impossible had suddenly become possible. And Murley Evers and her daughter, all the family cheered as well. It was the case I guess I'll talk a little bit more about, since we've been talking about it, is what's sometimes called the Mississippi burning case. Now, that's the FBI's term for it. And that, of course, also became the name of a fictional film about that. But Mississippi, the killings of James Chaney, Andy Goodman, and Mickey Schwerner happened, as was mentioned earlier, June 21st of 1964, the first day of summer. To back up a time to explain a little bit more, the Mickey Schwerner's wife, Rita, were already working, they and James Chaney were already working in the movement in Mississippi in 64. James Chaney actually worked in it even before that, but they were working together. And this was in a place called Meridian, Mississippi, which is East Mississippi. And it's not that far from Philadelphia. So they wind up going up to the training in Oxford, Ohio, which took place for these Freedom Summer students who were going to come to Mississippi and help basically to change Mississippi and therefore change the nation. That was the idea behind it. And so there were hundreds of students who trained in Oxford, Ohio. And while they're there, they get news of this church being burned down. In fact, I was just there earlier today. That's what I was driving in from, was Mount Zion Methodist Church in Neshoba County, Mississippi. And so they had the Klan had attacked church members there. They've heard the civil rights workers were there. They beat the church members. They burned the church to the ground. And all this was, the reason they burned it was to lure the civil rights workers to the area. And sure enough, they came to investigate. They came back early from Oxford. In addition to Mickey and J.E., that was his nickname, James's nickname, Andy Goodman came as well. And so he was one of the Freedom Summer volunteers who was going to work in Meridian. So they all came back early to go investigate this fire. While they're investigating the fire or coming back from that investigation, driving back from it, they get arrested, as Susie mentioned, on trumped up charges. They charged with speeding, which wasn't true. And the other two were held for like investigating this church fire. Of course, they had nothing to do with it. But anyway, anyway, all this happens and they get released that night at 10:30 from jail into the hands of the waiting Klansmen, who then proceed to take them out to a remote area and kill them.
And of course, their bodies weren't found for 44 days. Really a miracle their bodies were ever found. If it weren't for one of the Klansmen talking, basically, we would never know where the bodies were buried to this day. But the guy who orchestrated this was a guy named Edgar Ray Killen. The guy who ordered it was a guy named Sam Bowers, who was the head of the White Knights of the KKK in Mississippi, responsible for at least 10 killings. Remember I said earlier, if someone tells me I can't have something, I want it like a million times worse. Well, Sam Bowers, who never ever talked to the press, gave an interview to the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. So when I found that out, and it was sealed, like the public couldn't see it. So when I found that out, I began to develop a source who had access to it. He basically leaked it to me, and I read it. And Bowers talked about there was a trial. No one had ever been prosecuted for murder, but there had been a federal trial. And so Bowers, on federal charges, of conspiracy to deprive these civil rights workers of their civil rights. And so Bowers was one. There were eight. Basically, Bowers was one of 7 Klansmen who was convicted in that case. The rest of the 18 walked, including a guy named Edgar Ray Killen, or as he's known locally, Preacher Killen, who kind of orchestrated this whole thing. So Bowers said in this interview he was quite delighted to be convicted and have the main instigator of the entire affair walk out of the courtroom a free man. He's referring to Edgar Ray Killen. And so I called him up. I called Preacher Killen up. You know, we talked for quite a while. And finally, at some point, he said, there's some guy in Jackson just keeps stirring things up and stirring things up and stirring things up. And I just didn't have the heart to tell him it was me. So I took him and his wife out for catfish. And while we're eating, I asked him, you know, if he had anything to do with the killings of 3 civil rights workers. He said no. Then he, you know, when I asked him what should happen to the people that were responsible for this, he said, I'm not going to say they were wrong, which I thought was kind of an interesting comment, right? And then proceeds to tell me a story about himself when the FBI investigated, at the time the FBI began to investigate Dr. King's assassination, they had no idea who did it. So they sent out agents everywhere to talk to basically white supremacists and people like that. So 2 of them show up at the doorstep of Preacher Killen and want to know his whereabouts on April 4th, 1968. He refuses to talk to him. So, but the agent leaves his card. So time goes on. After a while, Preacher Killen picks up the phone, dials the FBI agent, wants to know who killed King. And the agent's like, why do you want to know? And Killen's like, man, I want to shake his hand. You know, sometimes people will say to me, Jerry, why don't you leave these old guys alone? And the thing is, these guys were young killers. They just happened to get old, right? Edgar Ray Killen was convicted on the exact anniversary of those killings, June 21st in 2005, and sentenced to 60 years in prison where he died. To date now, there have been 24 convictions in these cases, and it's a matter of faith with me, but I believe God's hand's been involved in these. And it's been amazing to witness, but the most amazing thing I've witnessed has actually been some of the racial reconciliation, which I saw in the Vernon Damer case, which is a whole nother case I could talk about as well. But I think that pretty much tells the story of these, some of these cases. And it's just been amazing to see justice happen against impossible odds. And now to you, Susie, and whoever else is handling questions or whatever.
What Jerry failed to mention is he has a great book out called Race Against Time. And I highly recommend, besides getting Freedom is a Constant Struggle, to also get Race Against Time. And of course, Terry and Greg have lots of music that's available for all of you. And the holidays are coming. Anyway, I'd like to open it up now for questions and answers. I just want to let the audience know that I had some technological problems. So I'm doing this on my phone, and sometimes it's difficult for me to hear. So please bear with me. So I'm going to send this back to Busboys and Poets, who's going to field the questions.
Hello, hello. All right. What a lovely program. Thank you guys both so much. And shout out to Jerry. We do have Jerry's book, Race Against Time, in most of our locations, and you can find them on Bookshop as well. And to kind of start, so we got a question. What made you guys reprint and re-release the book this year? What was a catalyst? What exactly did it mean for you all to kind of revisit this work and put it back out to the masses?
Well, long story short, the book came out in 1999. It took 8 years of my life. I had no computer technology, which you can tell I'm still pretty much a dinosaur when it comes to technology. I did this book with an electric typewriter and a telephone and snail mail, which is probably why it took 8 years. And it was actually Julian Bond who threatened to never participate in another project of mine again unless I got a computer. So I did. But at the time, I was on an Alabama tour, and the book originally came out through Black Belt Press, which was also Randall Williams.
Right.
And things happened there. So he and Suzanne LaRosa went out and they started New South Books. But the book ended up staying, which the publisher became River City Press, and it just sat there. It basically sat there for 20 years. They did nothing with the book. And I kept trying to get a hold of them. And Randall and I actually had lots of conversations about it. In fact, I saw Randall at Highlander's 75th anniversary. And it was only recently where that publisher was going out of business because they wouldn't let Randall have the book that we were finally able to do this. And we all felt that it was the time to do it, especially with the tumultuous climate that we are in.
Thank you. I also want to say for the people at home, this is a thick boy. This is a thick book. So the fact that you did that on an electric typewriter, I'm going to commend you because wow.
Well, the funny thing is that I was so technologically inept that when I was proofing some of the things that were coming out of Black Belt Press, that one morning I sent Randall 40 pages and he came in and he said he couldn't understand why there were 40 blank pages of paper on the floor. So, they did the design. We were really collaborators with the book. At that time, it was the biggest book that they had done. It's 560 pages, and kudos to them because the technology has changed since the original book came out. They literally had to scan all 560 pages to make this come out the same way that it did 20 years ago.
You saw my eyes pop wide open, and that was for a reason. That is incredible. How important was it for you for it to have that same feel 20 odd years later?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
How important was it for you to have that same feeling from 1999 publishing? Exactly. Magpie showing us how big it is. Exactly. Was there a reason why you wanted that continuity in terms of like the layout and everything within the book?
Well, it's interesting because I wasn't sure that it was going to be the same book. But, it's just as much Randall's book as it is mine. And we wanted to protect the integrity of it. So it's a reprint. I want to let people know that it hasn't been updated for 20 years, which means the bios are the same. The stories are the same. 40 people have passed on sadly, since the book came to see the light of day. But so when people look at it, I want them to know it's not a new edition. It is a reprint, but it's timely, and it was definitely important for it to be out now.
For sure. Well, thank you
And
so much.
And the photo, I might add, something that's in the book that is not generally, I guess you can find it on the internet now, but at the time it was not generally available, and that was a photograph of Emmett Till, which Susie got permission to publish.
That's awesome. I was going to say, we're very spoiled in today because we see all of these black and white photos from the 60s, 50s, 40s, and we don't think of the like historical, what's the word, the archivery that has to go into it and how much of a search it can be. So just incredible, Susie. Thank you. And we have a question from Magpie, actually. And the question is, who are some of your top influences in your music making? And then how did being a part of Freedom is a Constant Struggle affect your music making moving forward?
Well,
we both came up during the 60s. We both started playing music in the 1960s, and I can say that for me, the music of the Civil Rights Movement was really close to home because my father worked for the Urban League, and we were involved. Our family was involved in the movement. So at that time, in those years, music of that dealt with that social political struggle and with other social political struggles, that was a major part of a lot of our lives, and certainly was a huge part of my life. So specifically, the influences were the songwriters of those years who were the preeminent writers from our elders, people like Pete Seeger, who was very involved right there on the front lines of the movement with his guitar and his banjo. And then the others that came along it sort of in his footsteps, people like Phil Oakes and Eric Anderson, whose songs we sang tonight. And then of course there were the artists within the movement who were creating the songs, the frontline songs, the people like the SNCC Freedom Singers, a number of whom have passed on now, but some of whom are still around, people like Bernice Johnson Reagan and Chuck Neblett and Betty Mae Fikes. And then, of course, the Jones brothers who have passed on, Marshall Jones, Matt Jones. That music is just so totally inspirational to us.
We've been very lucky, thanks to Susie, to actually meet and sing with Matt and Marshall Jones, Wazir Peacock, some of the original SNCC Freedom singers. Also, my background is I had relatives in Meridian, Mississippi. My family was from Mississippi. I was actually there and got my cousins to go see Martin Luther King March for the March Against Fear. And so,
which was what, 66?
66, yeah.
66.
So all those kinds of connections for us, it was like connecting the dots. And when Susie asked us to be a part of this project, we were completely honored and also felt really compelled because we personally have personal experience as well with what went down in Mississippi. So I'm just thrilled to have a chance to share these thoughts with you and with Jerry and Susie and Busboys. We're so thankful that you're allowing this to happen.
And just one more comment, which is going forward, you can't say it enough, that particular time, the music of that time has had a tremendous impact on what we do as musicians and as activists right now and going forward. So we're still writing songs and still dealing with the kinds of issues that
And I do want to say one more thing about Terry, which she didn't say, is Terry is a Kent survivor. She was an eyewitness to the May 4th, 1970 shootings on the Kent State University campus, and Greg was a townie. So I believe that also catapulted them into a political singer-songwriter world.
Oh, for sure, including the Jackson State happening just a very short time after Kent that nobody talks about. But if you were a witness at Kent, you never say Kent State without Jackson State. So those little moments of your life, really,
they're big.
They're huge. They're big moments. But when they happen to you, you're kind of like, how did I wind up here? but there was a reason. And I think our reason is to keep the history alive through the music.
Of course. Thank you, guys. And I just wanted to shout out Magpie because that was beautiful singing that we heard tonight. Thank you all.
Thank
And
you.
yes. And then my next question is actually for you, Jerry. And it's a bit of it's a weird question. Something that I found people don't often talk about is joy and finding joy, even in spite of everything that you were researching and looking for and really diving deep into. And could you tell us about a moment or event or time of joy that kind of took you by surprise when you were doing your investigations or reporting? You can take that however which way you would like.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. I mean, Solomon once said, "When justice comes, it brings joy," and I saw that. Kind of tears of joy, and they are of joy. And I remember so distinctly when Sam Bowers was convicted of ordering the attack on Vernon Damer and his family. And of course, he died defending his family in 1966 because of his involvement in voting rights. So fast forward, a lot of things happened. But anyway, there were two carloads of Klansmen who basically attacked him and his family in the middle of the night in 66. And like I said, he defended his family. So one of the Klansmen involved, whose name was Billy Roy Pitts, he ended up pleading guilty and testified against the other Klansmen. So he testified against Bowers in the 1998 trial. And so anyway, there was a hearing later on that he testified in. And when he got done, well, let me tell about Vernon Damer Jr. actually. So at the time that Vernon Damer Sr. was killed, his son, Vernon Damer Jr., was one of 4 sons at that point serving in the armed forces. And he told me he kind of had to take over. He had to take charge. He says there was no time to cry. Right? There was no time to cry. And then when the verdict came down, and Sam Bowers, this is a Marine, or Air Force, pardon me, guy, and so tough guy, And when the verdict came down in 98 on August 21st of 1998, here was this, like I said, military man who just had his hands over his face, and the tears were coming and coming. Tears of joy, because he never thought he'd ever see this day. And so I always think of that when think about joy. And I've seen it in the other cases as well. Merle Evers, shouting out, "We did it, Megger."
It can be a really bitter. It can be a really bittersweet moment, especially in your line of work with the kind of cases you do. So, thank you for sharing. And so, unless we get another question through, I have one last question, and take it as you will. But my apologies. So, I guess my question for you all is: you have all been in the fight for so long. You dedicated your lives. You have, made career choices, personal choices, and they've led you all the way back to here, where we're talking about freedom as a constant struggle still in 2021. What message do you have to folks who are either new to the struggle or, like myself, or on the younger side of things? Won't lie, I'm 25. Just wanted to show my face off. And so those of us who have grown up, in this time of like racial blindness of the early 2000s, and now leading into, where we saw the uprisings of last summer in response to the killing of George Floyd, where we've seen, here in our own backyard in Baltimore, Maryland, with the killing of, oh gosh, I can't even remember, and that's how like tragic that is.
Freddie Gray.
The just tragic killing of Freddie Gray by police forces. What words of wisdom do you guys have for us?
I guess I'll go first. I'm a university professor at American University, and I always tell my students to pick something that they're passionate about, something that's going to sustain them. All of us here, we've gone in a particular direction. Jerry with reporting, Terry and Greg with music, me with anthologies and being a social movement history documentarian. So
Yes,
you
Susie.
can't be an ambulance chaser. If the fire happens here, run and go there, and the fire happens there, go there. Find something or explore something that you're passionate about and go for it and stick with it, because as you can see, freedom is a constant struggle.
That was beautiful. I'm sorry, y'all. Now y'all have to respond after Susie.
No, that's good.
That's really brilliant.
No,
Actually, we feel very similarly, but it's also really important that you get involved in whatever local thing you can do for wherever you are.
Yeah. Think globally, but act locally.
But then don't forget about the global issue, and read the books that Jerry wrote. Read the books that Susie wrote. Find the music. Research what you don't know, because if you don't, then those dots will never be connected for you or for anybody else.
What's happening in this country right now is so disturbing. The real desecration of the word freedom. People just screaming about freedom, their own personal freedom, without any concept of what freedom really means in terms of living in a free society, which is responsibility and accountability. You can't be free in a free society without being responsible, not only for your own actions, but for other people. You have to be responsible for what happens to your fellow citizens, and accountability. Freedom doesn't mean you can just do anything you want. Freedom means you can do what you want as long as what you've done, you understand that you're going to be accountable for that, for good or ill. And I think that's just really, really important. And that's got to be the basic understanding of what you're fighting for in whatever arena that you choose to fight. And right now, yes, racism. Matt Jones wrote this great song called "When I Was Young." When I was young, I fought
for justice.
I fought Jim Crow. I fought the Klan. Who would have thought? He says in the song, "Who would have thought I'd still be fighting 30 or 40 years down the line?" Until he sang, 40 or 50 years down the line, and then, he got to be an old man and he passed away. But the fact is, the fight's still going on. It's going on. It's going on in terribly, terribly insidious ways in our society right now, and it's really, really important for people to get involved in the struggle.
And since we're also so visually connected, see the film Neshoba.
Oh, Neshoba.
Because it has killing in it, and you can see the
it's
hate.
A really good film.
In this man, and we need to look at the things that we don't want to look at, so that we can change things.
Thank you all. And Jerry?
The only thing I'd add to that is I think we keep repeating our history because we don't know our history. And I think that's one of the big problems out there is, people, imagine, there's all this debate over what should be taught or not taught, in terms of history. And I have a revolutionary concept here. It's called tell the truth. I mean, really, it's that simple, right? Just tell the truth, and really, and look, history is supposed to be instructive. It doesn't mean everybody did the right thing. It's supposed to inform us. It's supposed to instruct us. It's supposed to help us. It's supposed to help guide us so that we don't fall into the same traps that those before us have. And unfortunately, that's what's happening is people are falling for the exact same thing. A lot of what Byron D. LeBeckwith said to me when I interviewed him
in terms of his beliefs, unfortunately, has spilled today into some of the mainstream, and that's scary. You know, I mean, that guy's as radical as they come. You know, and embrace violence, very verbally. And so anyway, those would be what I'd have to say. We've got to. I can't tell you how many people who've read my book. I've gotten emails from them who said, "I had no idea all this happened," because people don't know it. The civil rights movement in America gets taught this way. Rosa Parks sat down, Dr. King stood up, everybody got their rights, ta-da, and that's it. And there's just so many courageous people, and that's why I'm so grateful for Susie's work and other people's work, is that tell the story of these heroes and sheroes that we need to know, ordinary heroes and sheroes, and even those who played the music play an incredibly important, heroic role. Anyway, that's thanks so much for letting us have this time together.
Of course. And thank you all so much for coming out and having this conversation with us. Something you just said was really, it just really touched me in that, like, you all have been doing this work for so long, and it's just, we just have to keep going at it. And it is, you said, Rosa sat down, Martin marched, Martin got shot, we had our rights. And I was thinking, like, it goes even beyond the other, like, players, like Bayard Rustin, who, due to his sexuality, was,
right,
blackballed out of the civil rights movement. But it goes even beyond those kinds of leaders. Yeah. It's people like you guys who have been on the front lines doing that hard work, especially down south in Mississippi. Like, kudos to y'all, because, like, speaking for myself, I can't imagine. I can't.
The Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Museum right now is working on a project to basically document anybody and everybody who took part in the movement, no matter how small. And they're going to have, like, eventually, hopefully, a wall, kind of like the Vietnam Memorial. It'll just be names.
I love it. And all right, folks, do we have any last bits of wisdom, beauty, and, like, any ideas from y'all that you wanted to share with us before we end for the evening?
I just want to thank the Busboys and Poets team, and please send my love to Andy, because he has been there for decades. Every time I've come to him, he has said yes. So I am just grateful that Busboys is here and expanding. And I want to thank Jerry and Terry and Greg, too, for joining me this evening for this really special commemorative event.
Awesome. And thank you so much for the well wishes, because, yeah, we are all over the place. In case you missed it, folks, you can find us here in the district, Baltimore, Maryland, Hinesville, Maryland, and now Columbia, Maryland, as well as Arlington, Virginia. And with that, thank you all so much. Thank you for coming out and joining us via live stream.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
You can purchase copies of Freedom is a Constant Struggle tonight until 9 p.m. on our Eventbrite. And my lovely assistant here is going to get everyone off screen, because I know y'all are just staring awkwardly into the ether as I talk. And thank you all so much. Again, if you're tuning in live tonight and you happen to miss the first part of the program, you can actually go back on YouTube and rewatch it. It's on there, recorded for you as soon as we get off here. Again, if you wanted to purchase a copy of Freedom is a Constant Struggle, you can do so on Eventbrite, or you can actually go on bookshop.org/shop/busboysbooks. And you can also find Jerry's incredible book, Race Against Time, as well. Thank you all so much. Peace and love from Busboys and Poets Books, and have a lovely evening.